Hey, welcome, Golden Flashes, to another episode of What's the Big Idea, our program that looks at the research being done by our Kent State professors and the impact of that research on our community, on our state, nation, and indeed on the world. And so today it gives me great pleasure to talk with Dr. Johanna Solomon, a professor in our School of Peace and Conflict Studies. Hi, Dr. Solomon.
Hi, good to see you.
Welcome to What's the Big Idea. I noticed you're a certified mediator.
I am.
I want to talk a lot about that. Before we do, I'm just curious because you're in the School of Peace and Conflict Studies.
I am.
And it began as the institution's first response to the shootings of May 4th. Did that play any role in your deciding to come to Kent State?
Absolutely. And I, by the way, have a copy of the book that I edited on May 4th for
terrific.
you from my department.
Great.
But I'll wait till you're not driving.
Yeah, exactly.
But yes, and my position was specifically designed to work on community building around difficult conversations and intergenerational conflicts, including things like, what happened on May 4th.
One of the things I've noticed about being a president of the university is that things that are happening nationally and internationally are pretty quickly reflected in what's going on campus.
Yes.
How do you see that in your research and your role as a teacher?
So my specialty in what I do is looking at how conflicts impact our campuses and our communities. Peace and Conflict Studies was able to work with communications to run a dialogue, Israel, Palestine, and me, as after October 7th and everything that's happening in Israel and Palestine and Gaza, to really give students a voice and a chance to have a really good conversation. Over 80 students attended that dialogue.
Give us a feel for what happens at a dialogue session like that.
So there are two professors, myself and someone else. I am Jewish and the other professor is Muslim, and we modeled having some of that difficult conversation together, and then we broke up into groups of about 25 to 30 with a trained professional facilitator to ask questions and get students involved in that conversation.
When you're doing these, are people shouting at each other?
One thing that we find is that usually when people feel heard and listened to, whether that's on our campus or in our communities, there isn't a need to shout. And once we have that community agreement established where everyone is going to come together and really wants to be heard and also to listen to others, that is not something we see happening all that often. My research really looks at what different groups get out of dialogue, and if it's successful, it can reduce prejudice, it can create friendships, really get people in touch with each other, humanize people, and it even helps people feel more in touch with their own groups and their own identities and more able to advocate for themselves and their groups. Welcome to the School of Peace and Conflict Studies. This is our fantastic new student-centered space.
Here in McGilvery Hall.
Here in McGilvery Hall.
Wow, this is fantastic. And it gives us an opportunity to talk more about the school and about your work. And so I was reading some materials about your North Hill in Akron study. So could you just explain to us what that was?
North Hill is a neighborhood in Akron that is only a little over half an hour from here, and it's a center for refugee resettlement. There is a lot of disinvestment in that area, and that neighborhood was really impacted by the loss of industries,
right,
and the rubber industry moving out of Akron. So that makes it a place where there's a lot of housing and a lot of need for more people to come in and live, which is how refugees were able to be resettled there. When everyone came into North Hill, one of the things that happened was that there was tension between longstanding communities and the new community members, the resettled refugees that came into this community. Several organizations, including the International Institute of Akron, which is a refugee resettlement agency, came to us and really asked for us to see what we could do to help. At one of the dialogue sessions that we had as part of the North Hill Community Dialogue, there was a gentleman that was fairly upset about his neighborhood changing and the demographics changing. He came into the dialogue really upset, was somewhat disruptive, kind of insulting, not really wanting to engage. We didn't make a lot of progress really being able to include him until lunch, where he sat down and got himself a beautiful plate of the food that we had provided that came from all of the different communities around. By the end of lunch, he wanted to know who made that food, where we got that food, if he could get it again. And one of the people sitting just a couple tables over was a Nepali refugee who was part of Nepali Kitchen, which is where we had gotten some of that food. And what ended up happening was this beautiful conversation where they talked about small businesses, and the gentleman ended up offering his expertise as a small restaurant owner to see if he could help refugees in the community to help launch their own small businesses, and really related to the struggles of coming to the United States and launching a restaurant.
Well, this has been such a wonderful opportunity for me and for our audience to learn about the School of Peace and Conflict Studies, about your work, about conflict mediation, dialogue. You know, there are so many big issues that are always reflected at Kent State, whether they be generated from our university or if they're coming in from outside of the state or outside of the nation. I'm so proud of the work that you do and the work that our School of Peace and Conflict Studies does, and thanks for being on What's the Big Idea.
Thank you for talking to me.
My pleasure.